I never imagined my wedding day, the day I had dreamed about since I was a kid, would become the same day I discover just how cruel some people can be. I also never imagined that the moment my in-laws mocked my mother in front of 204 guests, everything I thought I knew about them would collapse within hours. But before I take you to that moment, to the gasp that silenced an entire hall, you need to know the kind of woman my mother is. My name is Ethan Rivera, and this is the story of the day my in-laws disrespected the wrong woman. My mother, Maria Rivera, raised me alone after my father walked out when I was 9. She worked late nights as a housekeeper and early mornings at a bakery. We never had much, but she always taught me to carry myself with dignity, treat people with compassion, and never let wealth define worth. She pushed me to study, to build a life she had never been allowed to dream of. And when I got into medical school, she cried for 2 days straight, both from joy and exhaustion. So when I met Lena Hart, the woman I would later marry, I was nervous about introducing her to my mother. Lena came from a wealthy, high-profile family. Her father, Charles Hart, owned 3 construction companies, and her mother, Vivian Hart, was the type of woman who treated every social interaction like a competition. Lena, thankfully, wasn't like them. She was kind, funny, and sharp in ways I admired deeply. She loved my mother instantly. But her parents, well, they tolerated my mother the same way someone tolerates waiting in a long line, impatiently and with an air of superiority. Still, for Lena's sake, I try to look past it. I convinced myself that maybe they'd warm up with time. I was wrong. When our wedding day arrived, I was prepared to marry the woman I loved. What I wasn't prepared for was witnessing my mother publicly humiliated by people who thought their wealth gave them permission to belittle someone who had worked harder than any of them ever had. The venue was a beautiful vineyard in upstate New York, decorated with strings of gold lights that shimmered against the evening sky. Guests filled the place, and everything looked like the fairy tale wedding Lena and I had planned, except for the pit of anxiety in my stomach every time her parents cast judgmental glances at my mother. My mother wore a light blue gown she had saved for 5 months to buy. It wasn't designer or flashy, but she looked beautiful. She had done her own hair and makeup because she didn't want me to add another expense to the wedding budget. When I told her she didn't need to worry about money, she simply kissed my forehead and said, "Me, Joe, let me do this my way. I want to feel like I earned it." The ceremony itself was perfect, quiet, emotional, everything I hoped for. The trouble began at the reception. My mother approached our table to congratulate Lena's parents and thank them for coming. She always believed in courtesy, even when others didn't deserve it. She stood there smiling politely, holding her small silver clutch, waiting for anyone to acknowledge her. But instead of greeting her, Vivian leaned toward Charles and whispered loudly enough for the table, and apparently half the surrounding guests, to hear. Well, at least she tried to look presentable. I suppose there's only so much you can do on a maid's salary. A sharp laugh followed. Their friends joined in. My mother's smile froze. Her eyes dropped for a second, but she lifted her head again, trying to remain composed. Lena heard it. I saw her face pale, and I, standing across the room, taking photos with groomsmen, only realized something was wrong when I heard a hush ripple through the crowd, like air being sucked from the room. Vivian wasn't finished. She looked directly at my mother and said, in a voice dripping with arrogance, "I guess we should be grateful your son turned out well despite. Well, you know." She gestured vaguely at my mother, as if she were pointing at something distasteful. My mother simply nodded, her voice barely audible as she murmured, "Excuse me," before turning away. But Vivian, unable to leave well enough alone, added, "Don't worry. Our family will take care of Ethan now. He won't have to struggle anymore." That's when I heard it. My mother's soft, stifled sob as she hurried toward the exit. Everything inside me snapped. I pushed through the guests, the music fading behind me, the chatter dying. People stared, unsure of what was happening. I caught up to my mother outside the hall. She was standing near a row of white rose bushes, her hands trembling. "Mama," I said, voice breaking, "what happened?" She wiped her tears quickly, attempting to smile. "Nothing, me, Joe. I'm being silly. Go enjoy your wedding." But her voice cracked. I held her shoulders gently. "Tell me, She took a deep breath. It's your wedding day. I don't want to ruin it. You won't. Not telling me you will. She hesitated, but then she told me everything. Every word. Every laugh. Every sneer. I felt something inside me turn ice cold. I marched straight back into the hall. Guest turned to look. I headed right for Lena and asked through clenched teeth, "Where are your parents?" She pointed toward the head table, her eyes watery. She already knew what was coming. I walked up, slammed my palms on the table, and said, "Stand up." Charles straightened. "What's the meaning of this?" "You mocked my mother," I said, "in front of 200 guests. You humiliated a woman who worked harder for me than either of you have ever worked for anything in your lives." Vivian blinked, stunned. "Ethan, lower your voice. This is a wedding. My wedding. And you disrespected the woman who raised me. You don't deserve respect from me, or from anyone in this room." Gasps echoed. Someone dropped a glass. Vivian sputtered. "We were just joking. She's overly sensitive." "Joking? You compared her to a maid and insulted her financial status. You mocked her appearance. And worst of all, you said she wasn't good enough to be my family." Silence. Charles attempted to stand tall. "Watch how you speak to us. We're your in-laws." "Not anymore." People whispered. Some stood. Lena rushed forward. "Ethan, wait." "No," I said, voice shaking with anger. "I won't let anyone break my mother's heart on the happiest day of my life. I don't care about their money. I don't care about their influence. I care about the woman outside who gave up everything so I could be here." Charles scoffed. "You're being dramatic." Lena stepped in front of her parents. Her cheeks were streaked with tears. "Mom, Dad," she said, "I love Ethan, and I love Maria. If you can't respect them both, you don't deserve to be part of my life either." Vivian looked at her daughter as if she'd been slapped. "You would choose them over your own parents?" "Yes," Lena whispered. The room fell so quiet we could hear the lights buzzing. Vivian sat down slowly, face pale. Charles stared at me with hatred, but even he seemed shaken. I took Lena's hand. "We're leaving." "Where?" she asked softly. "To check on my mother. She's alone." We walked out, and I found my mother sitting on a stone bench, dabbing at her eyes. "Mama," I said gently, "you're coming with us. We're not staying." She looked at Lena apologetically. "I'm sorry. I didn't want any trouble." Lena knelt beside her. "Maria, you didn't cause trouble. They did, and they're going to answer for it." My mother looked between us, struggling to smile. "I love you both." We left the venue, me, my mother, and my new wife, in a rented black SUV, leaving behind 204 shocked guests and 2 humiliated in-laws who suddenly realized their world was beginning to unravel. But none of us knew how fast that unraveling would be. Because the next day, barely 12 hours later, their entire world collapsed in ways none of us could have imagined. And everything began with a phone call I received at 9:14 a.m. The next morning, at exactly 9:14 a.m., my phone buzzed violently on the nightstand. Lena was still asleep, curled in my shoulder, and my mother was resting in the guest room of our small apartment. After everything that happened the night before, none of us had slept peacefully. My mind kept replaying Vivian's words, the laughter, the humiliation on my mother's face. I thought the call would be from a relative or a friend asking what really happened at the wedding. But instead, the caller ID read, "Charles Hart." My jaw clenched. I didn't want to talk to him, not after the way he treated my family, but something in me said I needed to answer. So I stepped out into the living room, shut the bedroom door quietly behind me, and picked up. Before I could say anything, I heard shouting in the background. Not angry shouting, panic shouting. "Ethan!" Charles barked, breathless. "I need you to come to the estate. Now." I almost laughed at how ridiculous that sounded. Why would I come there? "This is not about last night," he snapped. "It's about business. And it's urgent. Why would your business have anything to do with me? Just get here." "No," I said firmly. "You insulted my mother publicly and expected there to be no consequences. You don't get to demand anything from me." There was a pause. A long, trembling pause. Then, in a voice that was no longer commanding but cracked with desperation, he said, "Please just come. It's about your mother, too." That froze me. Before I could question him, the line cut off. I stood there for a moment, my heartbeat loud in my ears. Something wasn't right. Charles' heart was many things, arrogant, controlling, dismissive, but I had never heard him sound afraid. When I returned to the bedroom, Lena was sitting up, rubbing her eyes. "Ethan," she whispered, "what happened?" I explained everything. Her face drained of color. "We should go," she said immediately. "If he said it affects your mother too, we need to find out." My mother overheard the conversation from the hallway. She shook her head. "No," she said. "You're not going anywhere near that man. Not after what he said. Not after what he did." I placed a hand on her shoulder. "Mama, I know, but something's wrong, and I need to make sure it doesn't affect you or Lena." After a long pause, she nodded reluctantly. We got dressed quickly, not knowing what we were walking into, and drove toward the Hart Estate, a massive stone mansion overlooking the Hudson River, a place that had always felt cold and intimidating even before all this. As we pulled up the long driveway, we saw several unfamiliar cars parked outside. We walked toward the entrance, and before we could knock, the door swung open. Inside stood Vivian, but she didn't look like the woman who mocked my mother the night before. Gone was the smugness, the arrogance, the perfectly sculpted mask of superiority. Her hair was disheveled, her eyes swollen from crying, and her hands trembled uncontrollably. She looked at Lena first. "Oh, sweetheart," she whispered, reaching forward. Lena recoiled. "Don't." Vivian's face crumpled. She looked at me and then at my mother. Shame washed over her features so visibly that she couldn't maintain eye contact. "Come in," she said quietly. "Please." We stepped inside, the tension in the air suffocating. In the living room, Charles was pacing furiously, papers scattered across the floor, his shirt half-buttoned. He looked like he hadn't slept at all. "Finally," he said, running a hand through his hair. God, I don't even know where to begin." "What's going on?" I asked. He took a deep breath. "The company. Everything. It's collapsing." I frowned. "What do you mean collapsing?" He gestured toward the papers. "Whistleblowers. An internal audit. Lawsuits. Someone leaked everything to the press this morning. Embezzlement claims, illegal labor contracts, tax evasion accusations. Everything." I stared at him. "And what does any of this have to do with us?" Vivian stepped forward, wringing her hands. "Because they're blaming on your mother." My mother gasped. "Me? Why would I be involved in anything you people do?" Charles sighed in frustration. "Not literally blaming you, but they're blaming us for disrespecting you. Someone recorded what happened last night." My stomach dropped. "It's everywhere," Vivian whispered. The video was uploaded anonymously at 3:52 a.m. Within hours, it spread across dozens of social media platforms, business forums, and news blogs. Lena looked stunned. "What did the video show?" Vivian's voice broke. "Everything." She led us to the large TV mounted on the wall. On the screen was a paused video, the crowded wedding hall, the dim lighting, tables of guests. In front and center, my mother standing at the edge of the head table, tears starting in her eyes. Then Vivian hit play. Her own voice echoed through the room. At least she tried to look presentable. The laughter, the sneer, the final humiliating blow. He won't have to struggle anymore. The video ended just as my mother walked away, wiping her tears with the back of her trembling hand. I looked at my mother, who sat frozen, horrified that the world had seen her pain. Vivian wiped her eyes. We didn't know someone was recording. And whoever posted it added your company name and your roles as Lena's parents." Charles nodded grimly. "People are calling for boycotts. Contractors are withdrawing partnerships. Employees are threatening walkouts. And investors want us removed." I felt no sympathy. Not yet. "So," I said slowly, "your world is collapsing because you mocked a hard-working woman on camera and got exposed. That's not our problem." Vivian sank into the nearest chair, sobbing. "We didn't mean to hurt her. We were being careless, stupid." "No," interrupta sharply. "You were being cruel." Charles took a deep breath. "We need your help." I laughed. "Help? After everything?" "Yes," he said desperately. "We need you to speak publicly, to say we apologized, to say that we didn't mean anything, to convince people that we're not the monsters they think we are." I stared at him. Was this man serious? "You think I'm going to defend you so you don't lose your money?" He swallowed. "Yes." Lena stepped forward. Dad, do you hear yourself? You humiliated his mother last night, and now you want him to rescue you. Vivian reached for her daughter's hand, but Lena pulled away again. Charles, my mother said softly, surprising all of us. Why would you think Ethan would do that? He hesitated. Because you're good people, and good people do the right thing. My mother stood. Being good doesn't mean being used. Her voice was calm but firm, stronger than I had ever heard it. I added, we're not fixing the consequences of your actions. Vivian looked up at me, eyes red and pleading. Please, Ethan, we'll do anything. We'll beg if we have to. I took a step back. Stop. You did enough begging from people your whole life through manipulation and money. But that's over now. Charles sank onto the couch, a broken shell of the arrogant man he had been. Then we're finished, he whispered. Lena exhaled slowly. Maybe this is what needed to happen. Maybe losing everything is the only way you'll ever understand what humility feels like. Vivian shook her head. You can't mean that. Oh, I do, Lena said. You've always looked down on everyone. Waiters, cleaners, receptionists, anyone who lived a life you couldn't understand. But last night, you crossed a line you can never uncross. Charles slammed his fist against the table. We are your parents. Then act like it, she shouted, her voice trembling. The room went silent. My mother stood, walked over to Lena, and placed a gentle hand on her cheek. You don't owe them anything. You showed them more grace than they deserved. Vivian stared at her. I don't deserve your kindness. No, my mother said, you don't. It was the first time I had ever heard my mother speak with such conviction. And honestly, she was right. Vivian began crying again. Real tears this time, not defensive ones. We'll apologize, she said quietly. We'll apologize publicly. For what we said to you. For everything. My mother nodded. That's between you and your conscience. We walked toward the door, leaving them in the ruins of their own making. But just as we stepped outside, Charles called after us. Ethan, he said, if we lose everything, will Lena still visit us? Lena didn't turn around. Be the kind of parents who deserve to be visited. We walked out. The cold morning air felt strangely refreshing. My mother exhaled shakily. I didn't want them to suffer. I held her hand. Mama, they weren't punished by us. They were punished by their own choices. We got into the car and drove away, leaving behind a family whose empire was collapsing piece by piece, not because of us, but because of the kind of people they had chosen to become. Over the next week, everything spiraled for the Hart family. Lawsuits surfaced. News channels replayed the wedding video on a loop. Investors pulled out entirely. Employees resigned in waves. The Hart construction empire crumbled almost overnight. And through it all, Vivian sent one message to my mother every day. I'm sorry. No excuses. No defenses. Just 2 words. My mother never responded, but she read every apology. 1 month later, Lena and I bought a modest home closer to my mother. We started building a life rooted in respect, not status. Lena eventually reconnected with her parents, not as their financial safety net, but on her own terms, with firm boundaries they never crossed again. Vivian and Charles never regained their empire. Instead, they rebuilt their lives from the ground up, this time with humility forced upon them. Sometimes people need the world to collapse before they finally see what truly matters. And for my mother, justice came not through revenge, but through truth exposed to the world. This is my story. My name is Ethan Rivera. If you connected with this story, please share it, comment your thoughts, and follow for more powerful life stories that remind us to always stand up for those who stand alone.